walking the streets of this old mill town. Well, what we got left, and the people here, they got something else. Didn't know we've left the rest. Welcomed in this stranger, helped them down into a home. Said, come on in, just don't push us out. Together we can sing this song. We are the ones, we are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones, we are the ones build our own future. Don't need no handout or a false sense of charity. We are the ones, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Some ways report, it's not who we are. Just don't got the same rules. Well, those in power made their promises, but then only serve you. Well, them politicians, bankers and bosses, she got a lot to say. We can't wait on them, it's time to organize and build our new world today. Oh, we are the ones, we are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones, we are the ones build our own future. Don't need no handout of pity, just opportunity. Oh, we are the ones, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Thirsty for more than what they'll trickle down. Hungry for more than the crumbs that fall to the ground. We got to own the means, the tools, the land to build and produce our own. Hey, we are the ones, we are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones, we are the ones build our own future. Don't need no handout of pity, so you can't join if you walk with me. Oh, we are the ones, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Oh, we are the ones, we are the ones build our own future. Oh, we are the ones, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Oh, we are the ones, we are the ones build our own future.
I like your tattoos. What are those numbers on your arm?
Oh, that's the date my dad died. He was a fireman. Died in a fire 17 years ago.
Oh my God, I'm
Well, baby, so house ain't getting anywhere at all. It's been 7 years left by the wayside.
All right, buenas noches, good evening, friends, amigos y amiga, to another capsule, another episode, another space of Tertuliando en Cuarentena, which is basically an intentional space where we converse with one another. We have a intersectionality of where we are in these times of lockdown. And tonight, to end this week today, I always have to look at my calendar, 29th of May. So we have my good friend Dylan from joining us from Pittsburgh, from Steel City. So let's bring him on board so he can talk for himself.
Hey.
Hola, how you going, mate?
Hey. Hola, amigo. Yeah, doing well, brother.
It's good to
Doing
have
real
you,
well.
man. I have to uh I have to maintain honesty. I mean, this is the whole platform. I try to be as frank as I can. But when I say that I really look forward to each and every one of my tertulias, I really do mean it. And yours is clearly not the exception. You know, it's a 2, 3, 4, and 1 kind of deal because I use it as an opportunity to catch up and see
Yeah.
what's going on in your life.
Yeah.
So how are you feeling today? How's today been? How's it going today? And I'll just jump to it, man. Dylan, you know,
Yeah.
these times of quarantine, these times of lockdown, you know, what does this what has this represented for you in terms of pre-COVID times and now during COVID times? You know, what were you doing before, and how did this whole thing grab you on a personal level? And what are your observations of it in terms of societally, you know, in society? What are your views on it? How has it been? And just walk us through a little bit of how that has
Yeah.
been for you, man.
Yeah, brother. Well, first of all, it's just good to share some time with you. It's been too long and too
See,
distant.
it has been, yeah.
Yeah, but I love that you've been doing this, and for me, when you reached out and invited me to be a part of this, I was like, great, a good excuse to hang out with Angel. so, so I appreciate it. Yeah, so your first question today. Yeah, today's pretty good. Just kind of running around doing some errands. You know, it's still weird. It's actually my first time downtown Pittsburgh today since the lockdown happened, and it was kind of surreal because I usually work downtown off and on. I do a bunch of different kind of work. So I wear a lot of different hats, but some of what I do is the stagehand work, which happens downtown in our cultural district with our local union down there, the stagehands, IOTC Local 3. And so I was stopping down by the union hall to pick up some stuff. And so it was really weird being down there and seeing it so empty on a weekday in the middle of the day. No traffic, and then the extra, kind of, I don't know, just like haunt, to the downtown was there was a lot of police downtown because of the unrest going on in this country over the killing of George Floyd. And there's going to be protests this weekend here in Pittsburgh, and so I think the cops were on kind of full patrol. And so even though there was not a lot of people downtown, there was a lot of cops. So it was a weird day, and that kind of started my day, and the rest of the day just kind of felt kind of weird. But came back home, just kind of worked on some chores around the house, and it's kind of funny. I'm technically unemployed for the first time in my life, but it's still a busy time. Staying on top of things. So, yeah, and to your kind of fuller question, kind of pre-COVID, lockdown, and now kind of living in it. Now that we're kind of weeks, months into it, it's a kind of weird new normal to kind of just be mostly at home, mostly a homebody. I'm a really social person. I'm usually showing up at a lot of different meetings and community organizing, neighborhood events, and hanging out with friends and going to soccer games. And so it's been weird just kind of be hunkered down and just to kind of focus on how to be productive at home. And also, again, platforms like this are a good excuse for me to kind of see faces. So, doing a lot of Zoom calls, a lot of Google Hangouts, and yeah, it's kind of just been the present reality. trying to stay busy with my hands. I like making stuff and making music and making art and, doing what I can. So it's been a kind of interesting, and I have to recognize some of my privilege in this situation is that like I'm able to kind of do some creative expression. I know there's a lot of folks out there and coworkers of mine too that haven't kind of been able to figure out the whole mess of unemployment and aren't in as maybe comfortable a space as I am. And so I have to recognize that and be aware of it. But so it's been a oddly, trying to find some silver lining, an oddly good place to kind of be at home, be with my family. I think you maybe know, like my wife and I started fostering this past year. So, we got a foster kid at home and that's looking like it's moving to adoption. So we're just trying to kind of hunker in and love on each other and doing what we can for our neighbors on our street, checking in, making sure everyone's okay. So, so in some ways a lot is different. In other ways, trying to keep connected in all the ways that we were connected before all the lockdown. It just looks a lot different. So my wife's on the board of our neighborhood organization. So she just has to meet remotely, but we're still trying to stay connected with our neighbors, make sure mutual aid is happening. People are getting food. There's a lot of food drives locally here in Pittsburgh, and there's still so much going on. So it's hard to encapsulate in one answer.
Yeah, and I guess it translates differently in these times, and how we might allow that to translate differently. It depends on us, or to a certain extent, and what things we can actually do, what things we cannot do. And you brought something I think is worth noting. Our circumstances, and I think this ability that you might have to have some sense of I call it peripherality, to not just only consider your circumstance of momentaneous quote unquote privilege, but realize that your circumstance is not all defining. And I think this is kind of what it's kind of like. This could be kind of like a big umbrella that describes a big part of problems in society. The inability to realize that one's moment or one's circumstance is just that. It's our own, and it doesn't comment on what is outside of whatever arm's reach we have. What is beyond that, even at a smaller scale, community wise, at a bit of a bigger scale, city wise, and at a world scale, to have that in Spanish we say sintonización, that like that tuning of that awareness is very important, because even as we have it, sometimes we accidentally fall into what affects me affects everyone, or what I'm enjoying, everyone is enjoying of. So it's good to have that. I like to and it's good to have that, not as a badge of honor. It's just good to have that because it's just human.
Kind of helps you relate to others that aren't yourself. Solidarity.
And in that space of getting to know where you're coming from and where you're going and where you've been, I like to ask the friends that I have over if they can share as freely as they want, as freely as they can. I like to think of these spaces as consenting spaces, because everyone who's on it, I didn't put a revolver on their head to be on here. And I think the great majority, to not say everyone, but I would say everyone has come in because they've had some sort of desire, curiosity, desire, wondering, whatever, but they're here.
Yeah, I was like, what is Angel up to? I gotta check that out.
I know. I've been to. I ask myself that too every day. What is going to happen today? But eternally curious. So three. I asked for people three moments, three instances, or even more. Where you feel in life has given you an instance or moment or like a process that you consider it was cathartic, you consider it was defining to the person you are right now, to where you are at right now. It's like kind of like moments in life that you can remember that were defining moments, whether you realized it then or you just realize it now in hindsight. It could be as when you were a young kid, and it's just as recent as today. Any moment that you can point to, and then expand on it, share a little bit on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's gosh, we could take all night unpacking that.
That's why I say three.
Oh, yeah. I will rant on three for days. You don't even know.
Hey, go forth, man. Go forth. Feel free.
No, I'll try to limit it. Just taking some notes here. Now, I liked your word defining. Kind of, it's interesting, you know, as we think of life as a kind of journey, as a you know, a road we make by walking. I think something Brian McLaren says. You know, in fact, I think, you know, when we were at Wild Goose together, I think he had shared something about that. Maybe he had just wrote a book about it. But I always like that image of like kind of trekking a path, you know, through the unknown. And I also like to think of life as, you know, because there's not like I have a hard time picking like single moments like that I've seen transformation in my life or change and growth, because as you know, and you know, probably a lot of folks know, like it's usually not just like you don't have a conversion moment, but life is full of micro conversions that are mostly unknown. You know, that we look back and we think like, oh shit, I changed a lot, hopefully for the better. You know, we want to think we grew into better people as we go, but it's always these kind of little unknown conversions. Probably a big one to start. Yeah, I'll keep it limited to kind of adult life, which I've been reflecting on a lot lately. Because I feel old. I'm, you know, mid-30s, but you know, feeling like I'm not the young punk I used to be. But
young and young at heart. That's what matters, my friend.
Forever young. But the probably major life transition that defined me a lot and probably built a lot of the relationships that I still have and kind of built the foundations for the relationships that came after was kind of dropping out of college, joining a punk band, moving to Pittsburgh, and kind of touring the country. So that's kind of like a part of my journey for about 6 or 7 years when I was like, what was it, God, 19, 18, you know, till whenever. Whatever the math is on that, 25. You know, kind of touring in a punk band called The Last Hope, and it was kind of an interesting journey because I grew up pretty like evangelical Christian and conservative missionary family, living overseas. You know, I never felt really quite at home in America because it wasn't my full experience, and so there was something about punk rock that kind of like the rules didn't matter anymore. You didn't have to be a normal American kid. That kind of welcomed me into that space. But you know, I still kind of had this like missionary background, evangelicalism, and so we kind of had this band that was, you know, we called it, you know, ministry, but you know, we were kind of deconstructing a lot of the kind of faith that we grew up in, and kind of realized like we were much more interested in building relationships with folks. And so we still kind of called it ministry, I think partly because I don't want to speak for the others, but I needed to kind of justify why it was good. And so I called it ministry, but really it kind of broke down my barriers of what kind of my spiritual life meant to me at the time. And it also just kind of had me experience just like a completely different thing. I mean, being on the road, you're meeting all these folks, and we never really stayed at hotels. I mean, the few times that happened, we felt like we were, you know, selling out. So we were crashing on folks' floors, and people we'd never met before, just being so hospitable and just kind of welcoming us in and like treating us like family. They didn't know us, but you know, we were friends of friends who put on the show, and so it was like, yeah, they're in, and you know, we were all, you know, punks and, you know, whatever. And so it was just kind of transforming to me to kind of realize like in some ways that you can kind of have family with anyone. Like you just kind of have to pull those barriers down.
Mhm.
And it was kind of probably the start of the deconstruction of a lot of kind of evangelicalism I grew up in. So I could talk so much more about that one, but that's probably a first kind of major life shift, defining moment. You want me to just jump into the other ones, or you got questions about that one?
No. Go ahead. I'll follow up after you conclude.
Cool.
I like to let the people,
Yeah.
develop their points and talk a bit. Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah. So the second one kind of builds off of that one too. Learning a lot about kind of hospitality and kind of radical hospitality kind of led me to ask some deeper questions, kind of more politically. And so kind of through, I started kind of reading for myself for the first time. We had found a new kind of faith community home called Hot Meadow Bridge Faith Community, a community I'm still a member of. And but years ago, and we were kind of hanging out in a tattoo shop. The original singer of our band ran a tattoo shop and ran to this church that was willing to kind of deconstruct with us and had us starting to read kind of radical theology. And so I found my kind of long story short, through that kind of wrestling, found myself with a copy of at the beginning, at one of the houses, there was a punk house in Nashville that we used to stay at and play shows at, and some awesome folks out there. And they had this sign above their kitchen sink, and it was like a community house, and it just said, "Everybody wants a revolution, but no one wants to do the dishes." And Dorothy Day, it said Dorothy Day, and I've kind of heard kind of like here and there like Dorothy Day, this, that, like kind of radical, Christian anarchist type. And I was just like, I saw that above my friend's sink, and I was like, God, I gotta figure out who this person is. I walked into this used bookstore in Southside Pittsburgh, and was like, "Do you guys have anything about Dorothy Day?" and the lady behind the bookshelf was like, or the counter was just like, "Oh yeah, I think we actually had something about her come in a couple weeks ago." And they just had this mound of like donated books or used books kind of behind the counter. I mean, it was just a ramshackle place that had been running for decades, and sadly is no more thanks to Amazon or something. But she just went digging through this pile, and was like, minutes later, as I was like combing the store, she's like, "I found it," and it's like, "Hey, here's The Long Loneliness," and it's the autobiography by Dorothy Day. And so I took that book, and it just like maybe the most transformational book I've ever read, because I read that and it just kind of resounded with me. This woman who was just kind of challenging the social norms, and converted to Catholicism, but was this radical kind of anarchist, pacifist, challenger of power, and just kind of started these radical houses of hospitality and all this stuff. And it just like blew me away. And I thought, oh, maybe there's just kind of like, I can still take some of the good shit that I grew up with and kind of transform it into something that's more beautiful, that resonates more with who I am now as kind of subcultural kind of refugee of sorts. And and that just kind of led me down a rabbit hole, connecting up with the Catholic worker movement, some of the folks locally and nationally, and then probably, and then eventually in Kansas City for one of the national Catholic or the Midwest Catholic worker kind of gatherings, the Cherith Brook Catholic Worker House, which is still operating out there, awesome people. Kind of were hosting that, and kind of did a protest against the nuclear weapons facility as a part of this kind of what they called faith and resistance retreat. And we all got 50 some of us got arrested and spent the night in jail. And honestly, I feel like that more than anything was probably like a conversion moment for me, because it was like a leaving of my old understanding of faith and kind of realizing that a kind of new way to understand it as more of a liberation theology and a kind of radical practice. And so we came back, and actually the house that I live in now, we bought to open up a Catholic worker house of hospitality, and we did that for a couple of years before kind of imploded after I left for a bit. So that's
this the place where I stayed at?
Yes, probably, yeah.
Well, I was there 8
How
years
long
ago.
was that?
8 years ago.
It was probably right after
summer 2012.
We had a yard, right, with a backyard, and did we have chickens then? I'm trying to remember if it was there or if it was.
I'm trying to remember too. I know you had the dog, and you had a dog. It was at its puppy phase.
Was Amber there? Yeah,
yes,
was Amber
yes,
there?
Yes, she was.
Yeah, okay. Then it would have been this house, yeah. Because I
Yeah.
bought it right before, she was my girlfriend at the time, but
Mhm.
right before she moved here, I bought the house. So, and then she was living down the street in the neighborhood, but pretty much living at our house too. And yeah, so we did that for a couple years, and yeah, so we've been in this neighborhood now for it's called Hazelwood. We love it to death. Gosh,
Coming close to a
going
decade now,
on.
hey?
Yeah, it's coming close to a decade, and it's now the longest place I've lived anywhere in my life.
That is, that is not
Yeah.
as that is not to be taken as light as one could
Yeah,
maybe take it. That's a big thing.
yeah,
That's a big thing.
yeah. It's the first place that really feels like home, apart from like the farmhouse we grew up in, like about an hour south of where my family grew up. So,
So then, what would you say would be a third instance, if you can
yeah,
recollect
and so
another instance?
a third instance. Gosh, I mean, maybe just more recently, I feel like I'm in this kind of new stage of life now, kind of post hospitality house. I mean, I think the combination of you kind of getting married, gosh, what is it, 7 years ago, and just kind of now living this, I guess you could call it domesticated or hashtag dad life. And so I'm being a foster dad, being married, being a foster dad, and trying to kind of learn how to live in this new space. I think for most of my life, and especially my younger adult life, and up until kind of getting married, I was I'm still a very extroverted person. But anywhere I lived, like I barely spent any time there. Like it was always just kind of out at shows or pubs or whatever, just like hanging out with folks, playing games, running around, just walking around town, riding bikes around town. Like, and so it was always just kind of engaging with folks in other places. And then, we bought this house, and the house of hospitality was a transitional time, but I was still pretty active, and we were always having folks over and doing this stuff. And so it was still very much like all the time out there. And I've been learning how to kind of recenter myself and trying to find some, which is unnatural to me, but some kind of home life balance. And it's been good. Like it hasn't been easy. There are some days where I really struggle with it, and but for the most part, especially as we jumped into this kind of foster to adopt kind of journey, it's really been a beautiful kind of realization to me that like it's okay to kind of not be the young touring punk rocker anymore, or to not be the radical anarchist community house guy anymore. That radical hospitality can sometimes look like fostering a kid and building a marriage. And so like kind of learning that like all parts of life are those like little conversions, and I'm not like a completely different person. Like a lot of that has come with me. It just has transformed into new ways of expression. So
Claro. And I think it's not to no. I'll interject just really quickly. I think it's not to undermine any experience.
Exactly.
Each one has.
I think I've had friends and acquaintances, before where maybe they left a community or left something they were a part of, or left a band or left whatever. Like it was time for them to change. And there's, I think, an easy tendency that we have, which is like, I'm no longer a part of this thing. So like it's done and it's bad. Like this thing I once was, I've changed, and that was bad. And now I'm in like for lack of a better word, like a more righteous or just a more correct place. I was wrong and now I'm correct. And that's what change means. And that's kind of just fucked up. Like, I think like we journey and we grow, and there's, when I look back at who I was 10 years ago or whatever, or maybe even when we met, I'm probably pretty different than I was that 10 years ago, but I don't, and I've had mistakes along the way and things I would do differently. And, the journey with the House of Hospitality, there were some painful ways that kind of ended. I don't regret those. I learned from them, but I have to recognize like that's a part of my journey. I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't go through that struggle.
Mhm.
And that struggle isn't a bad thing. It's an opportunity. So
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a Puerto Rican anarchist dating back to late 19th century. Her name was Luisa Capetillo. I think I have a book of hers here. I can kind of visualize the story a little bit better. And Luisa Capetillo said, is Amor y Anarquía. And she lived some time in Cuba, and she's quite known in Puerto Rico. She's quite known in Puerto Rico for being the first woman to openly dress up as a man, quote unquote.
Oh wow, okay.
The vestiments of a man. And there's this quote attributed to her that says, el que no sufre no avanza. He or she who doesn't suffer does not advance, does not move forward. This is not a glorification of suffering.
Yeah,
I think is internalizing and understanding that those experiences, which actually might be or might come at a costly price or might be difficult, they're not in vain. They don't have to be in vain. I think that's the best way. They don't have to be in vain, because we can have many painful moments and not learn a single thing from them. So it's up to one. I like to kind of explore that. I mean, we do kind of meet in that intersectionality of an expression of Christianity or expression of Christendom from from our own areas of quote unquote expertise or familiarity.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of good friends that I remain in touch with that were part of that. I no longer, and I'm kind of touching into how you said how these experiences are not just to be deleted and kind of like turn away from them. I no longer consider myself a Christian. But I think I've come to realize more and more that plays more into semantics than essence. I don't think much of my person has essentially changed from that day I decided I would no longer call myself a Christian to a few hours later. I mean, it wasn't like I was a vegan then and I'm like, oh, I just suddenly crave meat right now, or whatever might be the example you want to use. So, but there is something about labeling things, not to limit them, but to reference. I think kind of like birthdays, anniversaries. They could be like when we, getting a tattoo, getting a plaque, whatever. They are reminders. We kind of work that way. So not to limit, but to remind. And I do feel essentially like, the moment we met, and we actually the way we met, it's a commentary on that accidentality or that hospitality, because you didn't know who I was other than by reference. And having reference, of course, it is not ultimately random, but it is a sense of trust, a sense of, and I don't think that happens overnight, that sense of hospitality. And I want to touch into that. We come from different scopes. I'm from Puerto Rico, you're from the United States, but we have an evangelical upbringing to some extent. Did you have in that upbringing, with your, assuming you were raised with your mom and your dad, did you have that that raising up in awareness? You did say you lived in a farm. Having a farm life usually kind of goes intertwined with, I don't know, be more hospital. I don't know why, but the city life usually kind of tends to be more hostile. Did you come up with that awareness of maybe seeing it in your family, of being hospitable? And I want to touch on that hospitality.
Mhm.
what does that mean to you, and where do you see that kind of visualize it as a garden blooming
Mhm.
and taking place in your life?
Yeah.
I like that you're writing stuff down. I feel like I'm more of a teacher.
No, I just try. I just tangent and scatter too much, so I have to
No,
write
beautiful.
kind
I love it.
of key words to just kind of anchor myself. Um, yeah, I mean, being being raised kind of in a kind of missionary family, kind of overseas in for some of that time.
Where did you live overseas? I'm curious.
Yeah, so we lived in Granada for a couple years with YWAM. So my parents were a part of YWAM for over 12
Youth
years,
with a
part of their
mission.
youth. Yeah, yes, youth with a mission for the many
Yeah,
that
yeah,
don't
yeah.
know.
Or in Spanish, juventud con una misión, and the
Yeah,
abbreviation in Spanish is hukum. Why woman in Spanish is
yeah,
hukum, just for those
yeah.
Spanish.
For those who don't know, it's a global, non-denominational, kind of charismatic Christian missionary kind of organization.
Hmm.
And so my parents were a part of the Mercy Ships organization that eventually
Hmm.
split off, but was a part of YWAM. And so they converted old cruise ships and traveled around the world and kind of did different kind of relief kind of projects and mission work. So they were doing evangelizing along with kind of medical relief and whatnot. And so they were a part of that for 12 years. And we were born, I'm one of three. I have a twin brother, older brother, younger brother. And three of us were born while on that ship. So I kind of learned to walk and then learned to walk again on a ship, because it was completely different. But there
Wow.
was aspects, and there was like three to 400 people, I think, at one time living on that ship. So it was kind of like intentional community, everybody kind of sharing everything in common. So I mean, there was this really kind of radical community happening within that kind of YWAM organization in those kind of spaces. So there's something to be said about kind of being raised in that environment that I definitely took some of that and said, oh yeah, that shit's good. Let's use some of that. Maybe the theology needs to change, but like we need to take some of those actions and it's like even just like simple living. I mean, my parents lived on, I remember saying at one time they were living on donations of like $300 a month was how much they had to raise each month to kind of, and they had three kids. So that's like unbelievable to me. Like, how little they had, but it was all out of a place of their, their faith and their work at the time. So it's like, so part of my time was like being raised there. And then, it was back in the United States, and my mom's family dates back to the Mayflower here. So they're like American as, apple pie or whatever. And then you got my mom's side of the family, also missionary background that had them in India. So they actually, my great grandparents were doing medical relief work on the border of Pakistan and India and met Gandhi. And Gandhi praised the work they were doing because they were caring for, Hindi and Muslim folks
Hmm.
that were semtaring each other at the border over religious wars. And Gandhi said, these Christians are doing it right because they don't care what religion you are. They're treating you the same. And that's what
Hmm.
we need to do. And so again, there's like that big moment of my family history I feel has like really impacted me. And so my mom's family's kind of heritage being in India doing work there started a children's home for the children of lepers over 100 years ago. Celebrated 100 years a few years back. And so that's, like kind of amazing heritage. And it's certainly not all perfect. There's a lot of
Hmm.
struggle there, a lot of white privilege and colonialism wrapped up into all that missionary history. So it's messy. But again, you kind of got to, wrestle through what's good and what's hospitable and what's radical, and kind of figure out what's problematic. What did we bring over from our American kind of imperialism, and kind of wrestle with that. So I feel like all that, and then to get back to you, like, and then kind of growing up on a farm. So as we kind of moved back to the States, like my mom's family has kind of had farmland here, Irish immigrant family that we've had property here in Westmoreland County, which is the county that neighbors up against Pittsburgh. Um, they've been here since the Civil War, since the American Civil War. So, yeah, there was something about growing up on a farm and just kind of being let out of the house and you just kind of go. We had over 100 acres that we can just run around and be brothers together and get hurt and like hurt each other and wrestle and be okay. And there was something about that kind of freedom that you don't necessarily have in a city. You kind of learn to kind of just, maybe even naively just kind of just like trust everything's going to be fine. We're just like running around and being, kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, my family was always really good about being hospitable, and they always had different families from the children's home in India if they were coming back on furlough, missionary language for vacation, that you raise money at churches for the work that you're doing.
Okay.
And so they would come back on furlough to kind of tour different churches and raise money. But our family would always welcome in, and sometimes even strangers. I know my mom had welcomed in, and had really done a lot for two different women that were struggling with addiction. And at one time there was another family that after we all moved out, that they had moved in. This family had like 4 kids. So there was parts of they really saw their faith as a practical thing. It wasn't just a theological do on Sunday thing. It was something that, and I think a lot of it was because of their missionary background, where it was they had really taken on some sacrifices, financially and life trajectory kind of sacrifices, that said, no, like if you actually believe this stuff, you have to act differently, you have to live differently. So there's a lot of aspects of that I think were good, that probably impacted me in beneficial ways. But
when you referenced before, like because it's connected to that, because that's your, you have that as a backdrop.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned earlier about picking up this book or finding out about Dorothy Day from the Catholic Workers Movement. Was that a moment where you became more intentional on that on approaching that sense of awareness of sharing, hospitality? I know that was kind of maybe more ingrained within you. Like, you contrasted it with my life. I did not grow up in a ship. I did not have to learn how to walk 2 times. Maybe like for future generations, they'll have to do that. Maybe they'll be raised up in the moon, and then they have to come back and learn how to walk down here.
Gotta get your space legs. Yeah.
I know, yeah, and then your earthly legs. Some even down here don't never get their earthly legs at a more metaphorical level. They live way too far up in the sky and not very grounded. A whole other deal. But I did live with 2 brothers. I always used to joke with my former partner that she did not know what it was like to share because she was an only child, and I kind of made a little bit of a satiric go-to out of that. I mean, to the point that she was obviously continually annoyed every time I brought that up. But I did know, how to share a lot, but not, maybe I did not live with other families. I did not live with that stretch. I know that has a formative element. But that moment when you find out about Dorothy Day, I want to hear about that. What does that do to you, man? You're a very talented man. You're a very talented human. You do a lot of things with your hands, very creative. I mean, you could be I would dare to say making more money than you do now. And I don't know. There's a daring thing. I don't know how much you make. But So talk to us a little bit about that formative view, and how does that affect you on a personal level, sharing, hospitality.
Yeah. So one thing that just came into mind, it was probably something that Dorothy Day spoke a lot about, that to your question about money, like you could be doing something to make a lot more money. It's very true. And I've almost given up a couple times just because I'm like, I got a family now. Do I need to get a real job? But she stresses, part of the Catholic worker movement is that they're historically been really committed to what they call voluntary poverty. And that's not to fetishize poverty, or, like you were saying earlier, to fetishize struggle. Like, you don't want to make pain, you don't want to glorify that pain, or you don't want to glorify poverty. But at the same time, there was something about the way that she talked about almost like like you really needed to put your body on the line for what you believe. And also, I think the other big shift for me reading Dorothy Day was that that my life that was very evangelical probably up until that point shifted to kind of look at the world a little more politically, and realizing that there was a kind of journey, that I realized that the gospel or like the church or the kind of Jesus message I grew up with kind of gave me a foundation to realize like everything, maybe everything's spiritual, but also everything's political, and so there was a sort of evolution into that journey. And so so I think part of that, like voluntary poverty, I might not live that like to the way that Dorothy Day did or the Catholic worker movement does. But it certainly kind of helped me shift my perspective to realize like to be, maybe true to myself or true to my values. Like I can't just be focused about being successful in this kind of worldly sense and money and fame and all those sorts of things. And I had to kind of shift and kind of commit myself to being like, okay, well, what are my values? And, hospitality is a main one, so how do I still live hospitality, even though I'm not, running a house of hospitality, Catholic worker house, and so part of that's, being a foster dad. But another part of that is, kind of giving my time, my energy, my hospitality in kind of community organizing spaces. So how am I hospitable in my neighborhood? How am I meeting my neighbors and getting to know them better? How are we, that to me kind of grows into doing, housing justice organizing. Like, how do we make sure that housing, is affordable so that people who are working or poor or working poor can afford homes? Like, I was able to buy my house because it was like a foreclosed, rundown house that had been abandoned. But not everyone has the opportunity to fix up a house like I do. So I have to recognize that even in my voluntary poverty, I was making no money when I bought the house, but I was able to buy it for nothing because no one wanted it. And it was before Pittsburgh and our neighborhood were starting to get buzz and gentrified and all this stuff. And so it was like, I have to recognize that even those kind of, simple and frugal decisions that I've been able to take opportunity and take a chance at are usually not an opportunity other people have and not skills that other people have. And so recognizing that like my journey has to include those people. And so that's hospitality to me, is like, getting involved in community organizing and in political organizing, showing up to a protest tomorrow about Black Lives Matter. That's hospitality to me now. That's also like where, what vestiges of kind of faith that I still claim, like that's it for me, is like being, incarnated with others, being faithful with others, so yeah, I mean, that's a kind of part of my, I guess that's just a part of kind of where I've landed now, and I'm losing track of.
No, you're good. You're good.
But that's okay.
I was. It's definitely okay, because that's the very core of these interactions. There's no script. You're the one who's making a script over there, violating the rules.
That's just for my random brain.
I something I enjoy of I mean the brief time I spent with you guys, which is 8 years ago, but just I think what remains more latent and more present is just the online presence. I follow, I see some of the things that you guys pose, Amber and you, and something I really enjoy so much in seeing, whether it be pictures or videos of what Amber and you post, is how you guys work with your hands. Like this idea in a digital age. I mean, I'm not saying that you guys are not. I mean, you guys are posting things, so you guys are part of the digital age. You're not like.
I mean, we're millennial hipsters. It's just a part of it.
But nevertheless, you're finding a space that might very well come so naturally to you guys, and I so love it. I love when some time ago Amber was sharing some fabrics that she was finding, and there's just this love. There's this love that I hear in her voice, in how she's just very I could say diligently and humbly sharing that momentary infatuation with that. And I use the word
Yeah.
infatuation with in a positive light, like
Yeah.
meaning just very focused on that, very much present in that moment.
Yeah.
Or when you're showing some of your woodwork, which I have to admit, which is a big stigma that there is to be made, that men have to do that. I have not lived up to the manliness part of myself. But how,
You got the beard, so you're halfway there. Right?
yeah, there you go. I think I got some genes from my ancestors that allow me to pretend. Um, in you know in this like in an illustration of that is the fact you got this rundown house, and you guys have basically come together and kind of fixed upped it, and that now in this whole era of like watching fixer upper shows, I mean, you guys could have had your own little fixer upper show, which you guys kind of did when you guys were showing the progress of it. And I remember watching these videos, and I would share them with my former partner, with Melanie, and we would love seeing. I mean, she would love them. She loved seeing transformation, like fixer up or that type of stuff, and she loved that authentic working with your hands. So in this whole tell me how, like, Wolf One, like in a very concrete technical approach, where did you learn how to do some of these things? Where did you learn woodwork? What is the background, technical question, where did you learn these things?
The quick answer is I fake it till I make it.
Okay. That can be the long answer.
The longer answer is my dad. I mean, and my mom too. I mean, both, again, kind of going back to, my parents have always been frugal, so that's, Amber and I share that value, like frugality and thrift, trying to, live simply doesn't mean living easily. It also kind of mean, if you want to live simply, you kind of have to also learn how to do a lot of shit, so you don't have to
you can kind of connect that with the name of your album.
Yeah, well, it's so to the point. The album released, "Work Hard, Rest Easy," and that song you had it playing before our chat is kind of about that. It's kind of for us, it's very real and tangible. It's like, yeah, we're building a home out of really kind of what was abandoned, and kind of left in ruins by others. And in some ways, that's a kind of a metaphor for kind of our values in life. We kind of have to rebuild ourselves. We have to rebuild our communities. We have to rebuild, and we kind of have to, get dirty and kind of figure it out. Like, again, back to this, you make the road by walking. You kind of just have to kind of journey on and kind of be like, all right, where does this go? But yeah, my parents have kind of always had that. My dad was always doing work, and he was, as soon as we were old enough to kind of be capable, he was always saying, hey, come on, help me with this project, or hey, let's, because we grew up on the farm, so there was always projects to be had, and different things to build. And
was that ever annoying to you?
I thought it wasn't annoying because I thought it was normal. Like, again, we kind of lived overseas. Yeah, we kind of lived overseas. We lived on a farm, so there was some kind of isolation from other normal American families. It wasn't until I was like, maybe in middle school, getting older, that I realized, like, oh wait, our family is weird. And there was a little bit of resentment, like, oh, we're not normal. Like, not everyone's family is like this. And but anyway, as I got older, I learned to appreciate all those things and kind of take those lessons and kind of retool them. And so, yeah, I mean, with our house, it was, we kind of bought it and it needed some work. And I'm also lucky to have, other family members and friends that are just kind of really eager to jump in. So my older brother works for a green energy efficiency building company. It builds timber homes and energy efficient, like, heating, cooling systems and all the stuff, and solar panels. So he actually had a lot of and so he's an engineer. He actually had a lot of technical skill. So like the real difficult stuff, like, because there was no piping in the basement. It had all the metal had been scrapped and ripped out. All the radiator lines had been cut. And so he redesigned the whole boiler system, and we rethreaded all the radiator lines. And, so there was definitely some technical knowledge that he had that he was sharing with me that I'm, grateful for. And, yeah, it was kind of just, I mean, we live in the future where you can just, Google stuff. So it was a lot of just like, I was like, all right, let's figure this out. So what I didn't know, and I'd spent a few years doing some like contracting work, independent contracting work with a buddy of mine who actually lived at the community house with us. He was kind of in between housing and homelessness and living with living other places, and kind of moved in with us, and he taught me a lot because he for years had been doing contracting, running his own shop. And I had a truck and some tools, and he had all the know-how. And so we spent a couple of years just kind of doing side projects, and he just kind of taught me a whole lot about how to actually do it well. And so yeah, it's just kind of figuring it all out. I mean, we're still figuring that out. Even you're talking about Amber or fabric. I mean, over here is Amber's loom. She's got a big so she's got a big standing loom. This is our messy workshop and in process. But we got that from a friend who kind of gave it to us. It was his mom's, and she had passed away, and she was a weaver. And he said, I want to give this loom. It's handcrafted here in Pennsylvania, so I want to give this loom to someone who would really appreciate it and kind of continue my mom's kind of love for weaving. And so Amber's figuring it out, and it's a rare loom. It was only made for like 10 years by some random guy. so she's like just learning that and figuring it out. And it's just kind of a matter of, for me, it's a part of the joy of life. It's kind of figuring out how to make stuff, and it's different things for different folks. Like we like building and fixing our house because we can do it for cheap, but also because it's fun and we can custom make it the way that we want to do. So like all our cabinetry in our kitchen, I built from scratch, and I've never built cabinets before. I may never do it again. It was a lot of hard work. But I was just like, hey, let's do it. Let's figure it out, save some money, and do it the way we want. And so there's a kind of value there for us to kind of just again, we don't, both of us don't make a lot of money. Amber is a part-time nanny for some friends of ours. I do some stagehand work and some freelance graphic design work, and being a musician is never making you money. And so it's just like, but in some ways we get to live a very full and comfortable life because we're just willing to just kind of figure some stuff out and kind of do it ourselves. Like, so yeah, I mean, and the other thing you were talking about fixer-upper, and back to your other point about kind of, couldn't you do something and make a lot of money? And we've had so many people be like, oh man, you guys are like that fixer-upper couple. You guys could totally have like a reality TV show and like flip houses and all this stuff. And I even, had an old friend that was like interested in buying a bunch of houses in our neighborhood and flipping them, and asked me like, hey, we got some money. We could invest in buying some houses. Like, what if we become partners and you could kind of flip the houses and we could really make a lot of bank? But it goes back to the value. I was like, I don't want to gentrify my neighborhood. Like, I don't want the prices to fucking rise on my neighbors. Like, yeah, I can make bank, but like that goes against my values. Like, I can't do that. Like, I'll fix up my own house and, do it the way I want. And I do a lot of like handyman projects over the years for just different friends. And it's all word of mouth and, whatever they can afford. And so it's like, I probably could do that and run a really good, contracting company if I wanted to, but that just doesn't fill me up. It just doesn't give me joy, and so there's almost like that Marie Kondo, like Am was into that too. Like, does it does it spark joy?
Gotta clean up things, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like there's something good about that. I mean, it's kind of trendy and whatnot, but there is something about like the idea of like running a house flipping contracting company because you can make a bunch of money and then like displace a bunch of your neighbors while you're at it just sounds terrible to me.
Yeah. How large is our scope and our view of consequences?
Yeah, exactly.
We go back to that. And we go back to the source of the being, or the source of, and actually some people might describe as Paul Tillich would say, like he sees God as the source of all being. And I use that as a metaphor, the source of all being in terms of what motivates us. So what motivates us to, because those are very compelling arguments within within the umbrella of the society that we are happening to be in, the society that kind of suggests that it suggests that for you to be someone worthy, you got to do stuff, and you obtain your worthiness. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so you obtain your worthiness through what you do. I was hearing, and I've shared this a little bit with you. My royally developed obsession with Mr. Rogers, um,
It's
which
a good obsession.
it
It's
is
a
a
good
good
obsession.
obsession in my case. I mean, there are some aspects that materialize into books and mugs, and I fall
Yeah.
into some other trappings. But or a little encouragement. This was a gift, though. That was a gift. That was my
I'm
brother.
trying to think if I got anything to
you
add
want
to the
to
mix.
you want to compete.
I'm like, I got some Mr. Rogers shit somewhere around here.
And I use Mr. Rogers as a point. I was watching this old Charlie Rose interview he gave, and he was talking about being able to get to a place that we can gracefully receive. What does that mean to gracefully receive? And even though that's not directly touching into what I'm going to say, it does have some relation to being able to find ourselves in the essence of who we are. What does that mean? Of course, there's the exploration of life, not finding ourselves in what we do. And he did touch on that, with that song, I Like You As You Are, not the things around you, not the toys beside you. And that
Yeah.
that formulates into the pressures of a place that we find ourselves in, even you in the US and even I in Puerto Rico, that you find meaning and you find yourself only in what you do.
Yeah.
And it is wonderful to prepare yourself. It's wonderful to have a sense of direction. It's wonderful to do things even at a digital level or at an analog or hands level. But if we become dependent solely on that, I think it'd be so dangerous because then we become production machines.
Oh yeah.
Um, and living in this system, we get applauded and we get standing ovations for what we do. And that is something that I every time I get kind of lost in the moment, I go and I'll watch an episode of Mr. Rogers. And
Yeah.
there's something, and I had a good friend. I had a good friend of mine says, I find it hard to watch Mr. Rogers. He's so disarming, and he kind of is because it just
Yeah.
strips you
Yeah.
down
Yeah.
I mean, and that's why I feel Mr. Rogers is not as people might say, oh, that's so cute. I'm like, oh, you don't get it. You're missing. You're talking about a little bit about Brian McLaren written that book of Adventures Missing the Point. You're missing the point. What he's doing there, that scaffold that he made in the neighborhood
Yeah.
is so very powerful. And I think that what I like, and this is obviously what I've seen from afar, as I've only the most I've interacted with you guys has been from afar. This life, and I want to touch maybe a little bit into what you mentioned as your third point of that cathartic, like that family life. Yesterday I was looking at a picture a friend of mine from my old high school class posted of our kind of like our big classroom 2001 senior picture. And then some of my friends were commenting, and the good old times and stuff like that. I personally don't remember them as the good old times, but I do honor the fact that they are some of that, some good old times. I mean, that's not my critique,
Yeah.
but kind of like looking back and and thinking, man, it's 16, 17-year-old self. And now looking back at some the connections I have with my friends through Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, and most of my friends have kids, they have family, and I don't. I'm married. I don't correspond to any of these things. Not like, oh, there's such an intentionality. No, it's just kind of accidentally. I mean, maybe the kid part has been quite intentional, but the not having a kid part. But now you find yourself, and you know, I'm landing onto where I want to go. You find yourself kind of in that family life, but nevertheless, not observed or participated in a traditional sense. Considering the context we find ourselves in, the U.S. and the Puerto Rican context is not so different. There are some particularities, but there's a lot of values that we got from the U.S. You know, that colonial project. So there's a lot of common ground there. So as you get married, which is, I don't know if it was something that you struggle with, that whole like that notion of am I kind of like giving into this or whatnot, and you're going into family life now. Now with a kiddo, how do you navigate using kind of like on a boat as a metaphor? But how do you explore this coming from this punk background or that punk scaffold, which adds some values to your life, and navigate that family life without settling. I mean, and maybe that's part of why I haven't kind of. I have to be honest. I don't think I have, because I have not gotten married. I mean, I was getting to that point, I didn't. And that's so. But there is obviously there is that. And I think even when I do, I will have a sense of intentionality. I mean, I don't think, like I said, like, you know, when I did stop being a Christian, I didn't just change. So I think that that my life will continue. So in your case, I do see that there's continuity. But how do you continue exploring this new chapter of your life without losing without losing yourself? Losing yourself.
I mean, there's been times where I would say more times before like those kind of major transitions where there was a fear that I was going to be losing myself. But I think it really gets back to your point about Mr. Rogers, about the sense of, is our identity in what we're doing or in our being? Like is our being our identity, or in just kind of what we do? And like in a lot of ways, just the personas we create, and you know, social media is the best slash worst at this, is like creating this kind of persona where we're all encouraged to kind of put this like kind of jolly persona, and in some ways I apologize if that's because we've had this distance. Like maybe you've seen this persona of me, and you know, it's not false, but it is you know, a curated version of ourselves that we share. But I would say it was probably, I mean, the first major transition probably for me was, you know, when we decided to kind of break up the band that, you know, we were doing for 6-7 years touring. I think so much of my identity was wrapped up in being, you know, a member of this band, and so many of my relationships at that point in my life, all my close relationships, all my community, all my support was built into, like, Dylan's the bass player and singer of this band. And so whenever it hit me that I was like, time to kind of transition out of that and into something different, and some of that was because of, you know, my kind of political activism I was getting into, and I felt like music just wasn't like, you know, I had to kind of get more serious about what I believed in. I couldn't just sing about it anymore. And so there was some of my identity like had evolved before I was ready to actually make the decision to do it. And it was really painful. I mean, it was like, you know, actual tears, like nights of like not being able to sleep. I mean, it was really, because I think it was the first time I had to kind of rip off that skin and just be like, I'm not what I do. Like, I'm not just a bass player in a punk band. Like, that's not me. Like, I'm much deeper than that. I'm much more multidimensional than that. And it's, my relationships don't need this to continue. Like, we, like, ourselves are what continue relationships. So I think that probably was the most painful time. And I think the other major kind of transitions since, and all the little unknown conversions that happen along the way, have been made easier because that you know, that kind of prepared me to kind of transition. So yeah, I mean, I think the transition into being like a, you know, a domestic, you know, being a dad, being a husband, and in some ways, like, there's almost, like you're saying, like, kind of growing up punk rock and like not really thinking I was going to settle down, or, you know, I kind of wanted to play more music and tour and do all this. Still stuff I want to do, but I was like, yeah, that's going to be my life. I'm going to make it big. We're going to tour the world. We're going to tour Japan. You know, it's like all this stuff.
That would have been awesome.
Yeah, it would have been cool. I still holding out. And you know, it's just like, you know, I had to realize I had to let that go. Like, I had to live my life, like, not white knuckled onto the idea that of who I was, or where I needed to be. That I had to kind of like open up my hands, just kind of leave them open a little more. And in that way, you could, what was that word? Gracefully receive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I couldn't gracefully receive if I was just kind of holding on to my shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I had to kind of just be like, all right, where does this go? But also knowing, like, it's still me. I'm not losing myself. It's just myself is growing. And it's painful. Like, I lost some friends along the way. You know, I've rebuilt some of those relationships, thankfully. But there was, you know, some of my best friends that, you know, I'm not friends with anymore, really, you know, in all practical matters, because of those transitions, because my identity became something, in a lot of ways, just like, because I allowed myself to grow and change. Like, I know I was no longer comfortable with just being this version of myself, this persona of myself. And so when I decided to kind of let myself grow, you know, I, like, kind of organically, like, some people just didn't want to be a part of that growing Dylan, you know, and that's hard. Especially, I'm a people pleaser. I'm an extroverted people pleaser. I love community. I love just kind of making people happy. I love, you know, it's one reason why I love music, is like, it's a celebration, a joyful time. Like, and so when I know I'm disappointing folks, and by being who I am, and being, you know, verbal and physical, you know, visual about it, like, it's a challenge. So it hasn't been easy.
How do you deal with that? I mean, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with, I mean, I mean, I don't like making people feel bad. You know, I don't know if I would kind of fall into that category, but I mean, aspects of myself, maybe that kind of like lingering feeling that you made someone feel bad, or that lingering feeling, kind of like just sticking and it's kind of like a piece of gum you stepped on, and then you can't get rid of it. How or a piece of shit I stepped on. How do you, I mean, in my assumption that you have been working to find yourself in a place that you're dealing with it, that you're like, well, I don't want to be an asshole, but I don't want to be subjected to my perception of what other people feel, because there's also the perception element. I mean, a person could come up to you and say, hey, I am explicitly disappointed. You can have that, but mainly is a perception of what we feel they're perceiving. And it's so funny the things it's funny, the tasks or the things that we bring onto ourselves by our own doing and by our own no one asks us, but we put them on ourselves. And this comes about more so than ever in relationships. That's why communication is so important. So if anything, what have you done to find yourself trying to scrape that gum off your shoe, that you don't want to be an asshole, but you want to also, be okay with maybe saying no, or okay if at the very end of it, someone does become a bit pissed, not because you're an asshole, but their own issues. Their own
Yeah.
issues that they got to deal with.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think, I mean, there's certainly a vulnerability that you kind of have to accept. You know, that I've had to accept is just like kind of being vulnerable in that space and no longer needing to like be right. Like just I think I spent a lot of my young adult life like just feeling very righteous, whether it was about my faith before or whether it was about just like punk rock and music. I mean, there's a whole in punk rock too. There's this like this kind of weird mirror that happens, and so there's I think I had to let that go and just be like, all right, that doesn't matter, and so I had to kind of like surrender that and be okay with being judged for it and just being like, all right, like I'm not going to please you. I think the other thing I really had to surrender, and I think I certainly had a kind of savior complex with some friendships and some relationships I had where I felt like certain people were struggling or just needed a lot of help, and I needed to be the person that they counted on.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I didn't want to change or grow or move on because I felt like this person needed me to like just like be there all the time. And I think that's the hardest thing for me to let go because I'm a kind of helper personality. Yeah, I'm not sure if you're in on the Enneagram kind of thing, but
my brother is.
Yeah,
I get so annoyed when he brings it up, though.
Well, you're welcome. But Amber and I are real into it. But so I'm a 2, which is a helper fixer type. I like to fix situations, and the kind of dark side of that is that I can try to like fix people, which isn't healthy. Like people need to be able to be self-reliant.
I think I'm a 4, by the way.
Maybe you are. But yeah, and so I kind of that vulnerability, and then that kind of learning not to be a savior. Like that's not my job. Like I can be supportive, I can be I can be available, I can be present, but I can't just like just force it on people. And then I think I just had to really learn how to apologize to folks. Like it's taken me some time, but I've had to reach out to old acquaintances and old friends and just kind of be like, hey, like I messed up. Like I shouldn't have just like drawn back, or because I think it was easier for me to just like cut some folks out and just be like, all right, I don't need those folks. Like they're not gonna like the new me or whatever. And I think I made some really hurtful decisions and didn't handle things well. I certainly didn't do it all good. So I think having to kind of reach back out and just kind of let folks know, like, hey, you're like, you meant a lot to me. Like our friendship was good, and I know it's not that anymore, but it was good. Like, and so trying to find that healing, and then also like back to that vulnerability piece, knowing like some people aren't going to want to heal that.
Of course.
I've sat down with former friends and just been like, hey, is there a way forward? Like, I don't know if I handled this right, but I was just trying to do what I felt was right for me and my journey. And, can we reconcile? And they're just like, fuck you. No.
Yeah.
I don't want it. And and that's the most painful thing for me. And so it's just like learning to just kind of be like, okay, I've got enemies. Okay. Like it's
not all that okay.
Yeah, it's not okay, but it's just like, what do? You can't force them to love you. You can't force them to love you. You can't force them to give you a second chance, a third chance, whatever. Like, and so that's been a painful part of the journey, but I think it's important for me. It's been important for me to learn, like, that's a part of my growth too, is learning that I can't just hold on to those relationships even though those are the things that I value most in my life is relationships with folks. Mm-hmm. But I think I spent a lot of years wasting a lot of time trying to fix people, and that doesn't fix them. Like there's nothing you can do to do that. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, so
I think it's so funny. I mean, just sometimes written or verbal the way we group words together, they sound funny, like what you just said. Like, sometimes fixing people just doesn't fix them. It probably just does. I mean, it creates the illusion. It creates the illusion.
Yeah, exactly.
It does more for us.
It might make me feel good. I might think like, oh man, look how good I did. I'm such a good person. I like reached out.
Well done, buddy. Well done. Well done. It's like the I guess the opposite of flogging oneself. I guess, I don't know. Self congratulating or self caressing oneself. I think that it is. I mean, it's hard and it's easy. It's hard because to get to that place of vulnerability, to know that the option and the viable option is to just simply have to move on, really move on. Not this pretentious moving on that you have to communicate at the four winds over social media. Oh, I don't give a fuck about this. I'm so unaffected by this. And then and those very things reveal how affected you are by those very things. And you want to, and you're screaming out loud, a cry for help, that you want to let go of these things, even though you're pretending in your discourse that you are letting go of those things. Sometimes this in that space of dealing with, like I've been going to therapy, and I've had some little aha moments in therapy with my therapist, and who I would cartoonishly caricaturize as the therapist who is just dying to find a book in her bookshelf to give me. Every time there, she'd be like, I mean, even though most times there's just a singular book. And I was like, I do not want to read that book. Why do you keep on trying to push it? But 85% of the times it was very good. I think those things are just to kind of have a bit of a laugh, but but to find oneself in just that realization of, yes, that relationship is no longer, whether they be just friendships or just like those romantic, lover relationships. Those are the hard ones to realize that. I mean, in theory, it's so easy to put pen to paper. Oh, this is no longer, or this no longer is. But that application on the emotional level, it's so difficult to get, okay, I am no longer going to be which is the thing for me. I am no longer going to be partaking of this 6-year relationship. It's no longer. It's no longer. And kind of have to repeat it as a mantra, like it's no longer. Because a relationship involves mutuality. It isn't, and involves consentment. You cannot drag a person into a relationship, because then it's not a relationship. It is not. It might be a ship of you and a hologram version of the other that you're making up, but there's no relation aspect. So there is definitely a lot of possibility of learning in there, and of liberating oneself, to liberate oneself of the myth, of the idol of and I touched on this a little bit of because I was reading Peter Rollins' the Idolatry of God, and that, and the idols are all around us. I mean, we can stigmatically point to what we deem as idols, but oh my God, they're just so immediate to us, to especially those things that we don't see as idols. But that's just closing a parenthesis. I want to talk a little bit about, maybe on a bit of a lighter note, which might not very light, but I mean, we were talking.
Maybe I'll turn it dark real quick.
No, not at all. I think it's I mean,
it's all good.
Iconically, it does have some grayness and some heaviness to it. The other day I was actually speaking about grayness and heaviness. I'm a huge Bob Dylan fan.
Awesome.
And two of my favorite Bob Dylan albums are his second album, Free. I think it's Free Willin'.
The Free Willin' Bob Dylan.
And which I think it has one of the most remarkable covers. I love it. and the times are changing. I think the times are changing. I just stopped. I literally just bought the first pressing of the album, and I just put on my vinyl, and I just stopped to listen to the whole thing. And it's such a heavy album.
Yeah.
It's an album full of sorrow,
Mm-hmm.
especially the ballad of the only ballad he sings that in the album. I think it's Hollison. Sorry, I'm gonna butcher it, but it's basically about a family in the South, in African American black family, who basically is just the working man, just working for just a shit wage, and how the only viable escape he saw was in taking the life of his family and taking his own life. Anyways, so sometimes we do need to find those gray spaces and talk about, because it's a reality.
Yeah.
But on a bit of a lighter note, we were talking a little bit before about your groundhog problem, and I say that lighter on my end, but I don't think it might be very light for you. And we can I like to metaphorize things, but I don't think this has to be metaphorized. The fact that you have a groundhog problem, and I find it remarkable that you cultivate a great part of what you consume, I assume, or a part of what you consume.
A portion,
What is that? And then you can introduce the protagonistic role of the groundhog in the story. But what has it been like for you to embark on this project of consuming what you cultivate and cultivating what you consume, or a part of it? Tell me about the pros, the cons, how you've wrestled with that, where you go into it, with how much knowledge that you have going into it, the oopses and the, because I've never done it. So
so it's the oopses. That reminds me of, there's the Bob Ross, the famous television painter.
There are no oopses, right? Yeah.
There's no accident. There's no mistakes. There's just happy accidents. That's been our whole homesteading experience. It's just a whole bunch of happy accidents. We just kind of roll ourselves into it and just kind of figure it out. It's kind of our MO. But yeah, I mean, it's been great. For those that don't know, one of the things, we just got a house here in Pittsburgh, and we've got a little front yard, but a kind of slightly bigger backyard. We're in the old, what used to be a 2-car garage that we're kind of turned into our art studio space here. But we also have our neighbor's yard. So I found the fixer upper that we got, because the neighbors next door, who now live in Seattle, but their friends still live in the house, live next door. So we kind of have this shared backyard experience, and they had chickens. So when I bought my house and kind of moved in, and we were doing the community house, they had chickens, but they moved to Seattle, and they're like, "Hey, our housemates don't want to take care of these chickens. You want to take care of chickens?" I was like, "I grew up on a farm. Sure." I mean, we didn't do agricultural farming on our farm. It was a kind of defunct farm, but we did some vegetable gardening and that stuff. But I was like, sure, it can't be that hard. So we just kind of figured out how to raise chickens, and so we're now on our 9th or 10th flock. I forget. We just bought 6 more chickens, to replace our old flock. And so we're doing chickens.
Can you tell us a little bit about the specifics? Okay, so you see these people, how you are fostering chickens, or you are adopting chickens, actually, I should say.
Yeah, I mean,
where's the Google search for that? How do you
Well, Tractor Supply. You pick. I think this most recent batch, you just pick up a Tractor Supply. It's a chain store here in the United States. I'm not sure if they're in Puerto Rico, but you get a Tractor Supply, or there's the Agway, which is agricultural feed store co-op. So you can pick them up there or wherever. So you just kind of pick them up, or you can get them shipped in the mail. I think our first flock that we bought after the other ones got picked off by predators, we just ordered in the mail, and they came in a box of chickens on a little box. I mean, it's living in the future.
Little chicks?
Yeah, little chicks just in a little box, just with some air holes poked in it.
Oh my God.
the postman, we had to pick that up at the post office. The guy at the post office was like, "All right, you guys are weird." But
that's interesting.
Yeah, we're doing some farming, and yeah. So the groundhog situation is that so we've got a golden retriever, Irish setter, mutt dog, and she just hunts. She's learned to hunt groundhogs. So Angel and I were talking about that because I think I shared a video
The video,
on
yes.
Facebook or something of
I felt
Emma.
bad for the groundhog, and then you gave me the
Yeah.
whole full context. I still feel bad for the groundhog, but
No.
give me the full
Yeah,
context.
I grew up with a deep-seated sectarian hatred for groundhogs because on the farm, not only do they eat eggs and get into shit, but they just you could break an ankle in a groundhog hole because on the farm, my grandpa used to sit with a 22 rifle on the front porch and just pick off groundhogs as the sun was setting, and they'd be going back to their holes. And then so you just grow up just hating groundhogs. We'd call them ground rats, and because they just mess up everything. They serve no good purpose. I mean, maybe they do. Maybe I should probably be a little more humane, but you just kind of grow up with this hatred. But in the city, I mean, they just devastate your garden. So for the last 2 years, we haven't been able to eat barely anything out of our garden because the groundhogs would eat most of it. And so we finally built a fence, but I trained Emma to hunt the groundhogs, which I had, it's real random, but I had somewhere in the backyard, I found an old coal spike. Why not? Because you're in Pittsburgh and you just find coal spikes in the ground. And so I had a coal spike leading up against the garage, and a groundhog was running out that Emma had scared, and she never attacked anything. She's a good pup. And but I smashed the head in on the groundhog with the coal spike, and she's like,
God.
She's like, oh, I can kill those because she only killed one.
Was that how the training work was?
Yeah,
done?
And so from that moment on, she knew I don't have to just chase these things and scare them away. I can chase them and eat them. And so that summer, she caught 9 different groundhogs. She caught 7 last year, maybe 6 the year before that.
What do you do with these? I guess.
I just dig a hole behind. I have ate groundhog before. It's not the best. It's a little greasy. It's best in curry because the curry spices hide all the greasy game kind of flavors. Yeah, it's not very good.
You've eaten out of your own, you've skinned it and done the whole process.
Yeah, not with any of the city groundhogs, but on the farm there was a few times me and my brothers we
experiment.
We caught a groundhog, and we thought, might as well, if you're gonna kill it, you might as well eat it. That's an ethic. So we grew up in a hunting family, so you hunt deer and you do all that. But so that's the kind of long story of our groundhog struggle. But
have you been able to deal with it? Have you been able to deal with that situation effectively?
I mean, it's been on the decline. I think the groundhog, population, certainly we don't see them around it. We used to see them all the time, but this year Emma's only got one, and she only got that one that you saw the video of. I let out of a trap. I caught it in a trap, so I've got a trap now. And so
one of those.
Yeah, no, not one of those. It's humane traps. So it's one of those traps that you could catch them and go release them in the woods.
Okay.
But I caught it and then fed it to my dog. So,
you're horrible. I humanely trap it to then give it to my dog.
Yeah. Well, so here's the debate. I mean, I feel like I need to defend myself a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
Because we trapped it, and so my wife Amber was just like, I was like, I'm just gonna let it out so Emma can get it, and she was like, no, you're supposed to drown it because that's what the animal rescue or the animal control agency in Pittsburgh, they'll trap them and then just go drown them. And I thought I was like, Am, drowning is a terrible way to die. That's a slow gag death. I was like, at least with Emma, her mom was full-bred pit bull. She doesn't look pit bull at all, but she's got the pit bull jaws. And I was like, at least with Emma, that groundhog runs out and one chomp from Emma kills it. It's dead instantly.
Yes.
I was like, that's more humane than drowning.
It is. It definitely is a viable alternative, and also it's do things at once, and your dog also gets that extra pleasure. Yeah. I assume that. So you don't have that situation anymore then. At least as far as now.
It's on the decline. So I think between the trap and Emma, we don't see them around nearly as much, and we've got a garden that for the first time in 2 years is going to actually produce some food again. So we're excited about that. And it's I feel like I made some of my like vegetarian and vegan friends a little uncomfortable when I shared that because they're like, "Oh my god, just like your dog is just ravaging this groundhog." But I was like, "Yeah, but
Here's a story.
her killing the groundhog allows me and Amber to eat more vegetables, so it balances out."
It is. That's actually a very interesting, good point. I mean, not that I'm happy about the groundhog dying to begin with, but I actually didn't even know what animal it was because that's not a common animal we have back home. Closest thing we have back home, and we do see them crossing the street every now and then, are mongooses.
Yeah, it's kind of like a mongoose. They're mongoose in India. It's about the size of a mongoose.
Yeah, and
probably just as useful. You know, I'm sure mongoose don't serve much of a purpose either.
I have no idea. I don't know, and they look, man, and they look fierce. Mongoose look fierce.
I would rather attack a groundhog than a mongoose. Mongoose look, they're intense.
They look like they have a fight in them. Now coming to maybe I guess on more recent happenings. Something I as I am currently living in the US. I've been living here since I came back from Germany May last year, so I've been here about a year, a little over a year. Even when I was in Puerto Rico, I mean, I would still be tuned into the happenings of the United States of America, and the happenings when I mean specifically when in regards to the manifestation of that racism problem, and the current situation right now in the United States. I like to always make the clarification. I don't like use the word America because we have the whole continent, America, and within these United States, there's definitely a lot of fragmentation and very little unitedness. These things are happening, and you mentioned that there's manifestations going on or to be going on even in Pittsburgh where these specific instances have not happened, but there have been instances in Pittsburgh that have happened, I'm sure, with police brutality in that realm. What is your exercise of reflection and also as a white person, what is your exercise of reflection given the ongoingness of this clear problem is to even downgrade it? Like this thing I say that is a very intrinsic apple pie type of problem. It's kind of like as American as apple pie. But what is your assessment of this situation And as a white folk, as a white person, how do you enter the conversation? How do you? That's
a tough one. I think for myself, there's been a lot. I think all white people forever will just have to be continually learning and listening. I think there's been a lot, especially I think a big shift for me in my life as far as being more aware of my privilege as a white person, but also moving to this neighborhood that I live in now, it has been a big shift for me, because I think it was the first time in my life that I was around not white people. It's one of the most diverse Pittsburgh neighborhoods. You know, Pittsburgh is a very segregated city, so there's a lot of neighborhoods and it's a very black-white city. There's not a huge Latino Latinx population. It's growing, but it's mostly historically black, and then European immigrant and just white neighborhoods. But for some reason, our neighborhood, there's a history there. It's not just for a random reason, but it is one of the most kind of 50-50 kind of split neighborhoods. So there is a certain beauty and something I'm really grateful for, the diversity and the wisdom that has come with this kind of integrated neighborhood that is rare in Pittsburgh. And so I've learned a lot from my neighbors, and just again, for the first time, having like intimate relationships, like friendships, like good friendships with people of color. That growing up, even though I grew up overseas and we were in India and all this stuff, like we were still very isolated. There was still an isolated nature. And when you're a minority as a white person overseas, you're still treated like royalty. I mean, you have privilege, you have money, you're seen as, I mean, you're an occupier in a lot of spaces. So it's not the same thing as being a part of an integrated learning kind of space, where you have to learn mutuality with people that look different from you. So yeah, I mean, there's been, for just me personally, just been a lot of learning, a lot of listening, a lot of training. So a lot of the organizations I've been a part of, and even in the church community I've been a part of, done some, kind of white ally training, and just kind of, there's an organization based out of Chicago called Crossroads Anti-Racism Training. So like really just kind of diving in deep to the history and just kind of being like, shit, like we got a lot to learn. I mean, like you were saying, I mean, it's as American as apple pie. I mean, learning about redlining, just something, white people especially don't grow up learning our history about, like the deep institutional government sanctioned, not that long ago racism that has deeply entrenched our communities, not to mention, colonialism that still lives out in Puerto Rico, for example. I mean, there's a deep entrenched, still alive and active, racism. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of learning, a lot of humility, and obviously learning to what's the phrase, step up or step back. So as a white cisgendered male, learning like step back, like when I find myself in spaces that that are diverse, like especially when they're diverse, to learn to, as a straight white male, like step back, like I've got a lot more listening to do and allow other folks to share. Yeah, I mean, Pittsburgh has had its journeys here too, and again, I've had to listen and learn and struggle alongside my neighbors. Not that far. I mean, it was about 2 miles from here is where East Pittsburgh police shot down Antoine Rose about 2 years ago, and that was national coverage and outrage, and so participating in those protests and those street blockades and all those things as well, as a way of just kind of being present with and trying to live in presence and solidarity as a white person. Again, not trying to lead or teach folks. I mean, I think the only leading and teaching that white folks need to do is for other white folks. So, trying to learn to, and this has been, again, going back to, like, I'm a people pleaser. So it's been a hard transition for me to kind of be like, I have to call this out, like, and I have to be, and this is what, my friends of color are saying. They're saying, white people, it's not our job to teach you. Like, you got to call yourselves out. You got to teach each other. Like, we can't do the hard work for you. You have to do it for yourselves. So there's a responsibility, I feel now, to be a uncomfortable presence in other white spaces. And not in a self-righteous way, because I also have to be, I have to be looking at myself too. I have to be looking in the mirror and realizing, like, I still carry racism and privilege and all that with me every day. Like, I can't just, like, off switch, not racist. Like, it's there. It's deeply entrenched. Like, and so I always have to be, like, looking around, but also looking at myself and recognizing, when am I unaware of how I might be silencing voices that are trying to speak, and I'm just, maybe too righteously trying to share my perspective, that I'm silencing someone that should be speaking. And it's not intentional, so there's so much that white folks need to learn about, this kind of like overt racism, and then, like, just kind of passive racism that we don't quite recognize. So I obviously don't get that right a lot of times. I think there's a lot of times I try to call it out, and I don't do it in a way that's actually inviting people into a learning space, into a place where they can actually be transformed. I'm doing it in a way that might be too self-righteous. And so that's a hard balance to, like, where do you need to be, like, harsh and just be like, no, this is fucked up. Like, we can't, like, even the other day I was like, people, white folks sharing MLK quotes to silence, black people's reactions to murder, by the police. And I'm just like,
to
that's fucking
domesticate their
racist.
reactions.
Yeah, I was like, that's racism. And like, I just have to say it. I have to say it out loud. I lit a bunch of fires on Facebook, which probably isn't the most productive way to do it. But it's just like, but yeah, I just don't know what else to do. And so you just kind of react in that pain sometimes. You kind of, especially now that I have friends that are people of color. I've got black neighbors. And so like, and I know that they're hurt and they're struggling in a much deeper way than I am. And so there's this rage that I feel that is much more personal to me now that 10 years ago didn't exist in that kind of personal, interpersonal way. It was more theoretical. And so when it becomes interpersonal and personal through those relationships, it becomes more painful. And so I found myself much more enraged lately, and I think the whole Antoine Rose thing that happened here in Pittsburgh was an eye-opening experience for me, because I was, at a rally with the neighbor down the street from me, like standing next to her and just being like this fucking sucks. And it's never hit me like that before. Yeah. And so it's painful. It's painful, but we got so much to learn as white folks, especially. And we just gotta call it out.
Doesn't it seem like it just there's a quote I shared of MLK, and I want to share it with you. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the KKK, but the white moderate who is more devoted to quote unquote order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. And that kind of comments into the observations you made. I mean, there's so many technical analysis of how to protest. How is it that a person should protest? How is it that a person should not riot? How is it that Target should not have been vandalized or should not have been looted? I'm reminded of that Tony Campolo quote where he says, he said at this conference meeting, I think it's a setting, and he talks about hunger, and he says, this certain amount of kids, thousands of kids, are going to die from malnutrition, having no access to water, and none of you is going to give a shit about it. And what is even more enraging is that you guys are going to be more outraged at the fact that I said shit than the fact that these kids are going to die. And I think there's a that anecdote, using that as an anecdote, it's so repetitious because the only times when I see any form of outrage coming out of some folk, whether it be white, even Latinos or whatever, out of these incidents, is that I am speaking out now that this is not the way that this is supposed to happen. Every other moment, there's just utter and absolute silence, and then I am not surprised because it's a conveniencing moment. I'm going to vent out my fake indignation. There is no indignation out of the very root of the problem. There is the indignation as in reaction to what? To the constructs of capitalism, to Walmart, to the store that is. And I understand the scaffolding critique they're making. At a glance, it seems very logical. oh, that is not that they're doing is not going to advance their cause. Like, what the fuck do you know about anything of advancing what cause? A cause that you're not even a part of, but because it is not directly related with an entity that it says, I'm pushing all the racist buttons, but all of these entities are part of the problem. And destroying them is not going to solve the problem. Of course, they're not trying to. They're not trying to solve the problem.
It's just pressure. It's just reaction.
Yes,
yeah, it's just anger.
I'm here.
Yeah, and you have
I'm
to go
physically here, and I'm so pissed because I am not being heard.
Yeah,
It's happening
it's,
more and more.
This is unacceptable. Like that's just the message, And so, I loved your quote, from the letter from Birmingham jail, MLK's, famous letter, and it's just so powerful, And I heard that quote a couple of times, especially in this kind of presidential election in United States, is because especially the Democrats have been wrestling with like progressive, democratic socialist versus like moderate centrist, and and there's and everyone gets so white Democrats get so defensive about being considered moderate, especially in the MLK context. But you're going like, I mean, he said it, like it's there, and so especially in situations like this, when you see communities that have been left out of the conversation, and so the other MLK quote that I've thankfully been seeing a lot of folks share, that even MLK, the icon of nonviolence, said a riot is the language of the unheard, like even he was like, yeah, I mean that wasn't his tactic, but he also wasn't like. He wasn't going to, blame the victims here. He was just like, these people have been left out of making decisions about their own lives, and you've been taking their lives. Of course. Like, and I'm not gonna villainize them. Like, I get it. Oh, I think you paused here. I've lost signal. Angel, I've lost you.
There you go.
Oh, there you are.
Patience
hey.
pays off.
We were just getting riled up. Oh, I've lost you again. Hello. Where are you at, brother? Is it me that's out, or is it you? I'll give it another minute. But it's been almost 2 hours, so maybe we're just done. Yep, I lost him. All right, folks. If any of you were hanging out for that whole thing, gosh, bless you. We'll see you.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you. Thanks for
waiting,
my friend.
There you are. I was just about to press the leave. I was like doing a sign out.
Okay, yeah, I'm having some issues. I'm trying to get maybe my phone hooked up here. Maybe my phone will deliver better.
Yeah.
Okay. What out? Yeah. My Wi-Fi is having a bit of a Okay. I'm gonna try and plug in my phone in because my Wi-Fi is not done. I'm trying to use my hotspot, but it's not
doing the trick.
Rather than just keep on to continue. Give me a second.
All right.
Acting up.
Do you want me to fill some time? I can play a song. Coming back, coming back, coming back to you. We'll never go away again.
There we go. You came back with a song. So
if they were sticking with us, I was just filling the gap.
no, it's wonderful. I'm sure people are like, "Oh, finally, we get some music." Have something. What I was what I was getting to is the fact that the conveniencing there is of using someone who you usually pay no attention to, like for example, people finally speaking out. Oh, I just feel indignated or whatever about these lootings, and I'm speaking out that should not be the way done. There's no other expression before that, or how they used MLK. I'm sure they approached MLK. MLK, speak against this, and then he took a position. Said no. Or how they might even use nowadays Sean King and be like, Sean King, speak against this, is to find a way that you can use people to continually perpetuate the status quo.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, and to start giving a closing to this conversation, I want to ask you, because I know that you've been quite involved, quite politically, and I mean politically in terms of, Democratic Party or the candidacy of Bernie Sanders. And I want to ask you a little bit about that. The other day, you commented something like, here is I'll paraphrase you. You touched upon voting, but on this act that only happens one day, and then the real scaffold happens on the everyday basis. And I think that's something that people miss upon, this idea of, lately I've been exploring more into anarchism and what that means. I've never really touched upon. And it's resounding even more and more to me, not as something that's really immediately attainable, but as the explications of why things are going on the way they are, and how people here tell me, no, Angel, there's no good cop. There's no good cop. There's good people. There are cops, but the cop system, the police system, is not arranged to make good cops. It's arranged. If there is some goodness, it's an exception of the mandate, because the mandate, as I've begun to resound in my head, is that is to keep the status quo.
Yeah.
And status quo works if blacks are getting killed. Status quo works if the black continues being invisibilized. So I want to ask you a little bit about, your involvement with the Bernie Sanders campaign, and what does that mean to you in the picture, knowing that picture is so fucked up, and also that there's also the coming into the equation that many have, because it's how the political scenario has been confectionated or cooked up, that we make messianic images, and some people make messianic images of Bernie Sanders,
persona type thing. It's been a journey, and in a lot of ways kind of a journey. I'm careful to say from, because I still carry it with me too, but a journey along with anarchism as well. So the Catholic worker movement is deeply, kind of has a lot of anarchist type roots, and a lot of Christian pacifism, anarchism intersections. And so, for a long time, I was very opposed to electoral politics, and a lot of those circles I was in were kind of just no, don't waste your time with it. It's just a distraction. It's just a co-option, especially, I'm not a big fan of the Democratic Party. But, obviously Bernie Sanders was running as a Democrat in a primary. And then there's some other local candidacies here that, and my state rep, my Pennsylvania state rep, Summer Lee, who is up for reelection, I was posting about her a lot lately as well, volunteering for her campaign as well. And she was endorsed by the Democratic Socialists of America as well 2 years ago. And so on her when she first ran. And so I kind of came into electoral politics and I'm still very cautious because I think I've realized, and honestly, I think Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign was maybe an eye opener. I think for a lot of folks. I know a lot of folks that were in a similar position that were like, electoral politics, fuck that. Democratic Party, it's a capitalist party, and it's like, yeah, I agree. It is very problematic. And not just to mention the history, but just the current present, embodiment of it is problematic. But there's a certain sense of hope, and I don't carry a hope in trying to transform the Democratic Party. The hope for me is that, you see a lot of, especially young people, in a very diverse, multiracial kind of movement, grassroots movement of people saying, like, there's a different way to do politics, and not just politics as in voting, but politics as in like political economy, like the economy that lives with us every day, can and should be changed, and we can be a part of that. So, a little apprehensively at first, I joined our local chapter of the Pittsburgh DSA, maybe 2 years ago now. And I've been
Socialist Association.
Yeah, of America. Sorry, yeah, Democratic Socialists of America, which is like now the biggest socialist organization in the United States, about 60,000 some members. And yeah, we had some local victory wins a couple years ago, and we've been kind of trying to push that. We had an independent judge that was endorsed by us that kind of won, and then Summer Lee and another state rep that won as well. And so I mean, we've seen some victories and some progress, and some very effective, grassroots empowered, politicians. And so, obviously, I mean, DSA isn't the only piece of that puzzle. There's a lot of different kind of community and labor organizing going along with that as well. But yeah, I've kind of stepped into that space apprehensively, but also knowing like I've got to do something at that level, because I mean, like, it's not ideal, and I don't like the way our capitalist electoral system works, but it is what we have, and I've learned to be a little more pragmatic than maybe more anarchistic, idealistic 10 years ago me would have been. But I still feel like I need to hold on to some of those values, but there's different ways to kind of do the tactics and trying to balance that. But the other thing I've appreciated about DSA and other organizations that are doing this kind of movement work is that, they'll endorse candidates and do some like electoral stuff and, do voting and whatnot, but that most of their work is not focused on that. Most of their work is on, so our local DSA chapter does a lot around housing justice. So we've been, the housing committee that I spend most of my time in with the DSA is looking on tenant union, organizing. They're doing a lot of, cooperative housing and land trust kind of education and organizing as well. So, I mean, they see the connection of like, having friendly and sympathetic folks in elected office is helpful. So yeah, we'll do some of that when it makes sense. But it's mostly because we need those people there so that they don't get in our way whenever we do the movement work on the ground on the day-to-day stuff. And so it's like looking at the bigger picture and saying like, we need to kind of play all these pieces. And so trying to think smart about our organizing. I mean, there's only been like 3 campaigns that I've ever volunteered for. I mean, Bernie Sanders, my state rep, Summer Lee, and then there was an independent campaign that I did some design work for and volunteering for our city council. He didn't win. His name was Randall Taylor, and he was a housing justice organizer locally. But so as I'm still picky about where I'm going to put my time, and I've just like had to let go a little bit of my like kind of earlier purity politics around it. I think it, I still have a line. I'm not going to volunteer for Joe Biden's campaign. I'm not, he's, too far to the right for me, but I feel caught between a rock and a hard place when you got Trump versus Biden. And I think that's a conversation a lot of folks on the left are having. And I'm not sure where I'm going to land on that. I mean, it is really hard. I've never voted for a Democrat for president before, or a Republican. So, I mean, it's all messy, and I'm not very comfortable with it, but it's kind of being okay with being uncomfortable, because honestly, like I've more and more I've come away from like an ideological political kind of space to be more of a, I think about it more about like what kind of conversations am I having with my neighbors that aren't radical? What kind of conversations make sense to my union coworkers? They're in a union, but most of them aren't radical, like by whatever terms, or left. But like, how do we have political conversations that make sense to just like common folk, like people that aren't in our like cool political organizing circles or our theological thinking circles or whatever? Like, I mean, like, so how do we have like just real conversation with real folks? And I've become more and more concerned about how does my life and my time and my organizing and my spirituality and how do all those things make more sense to just like people that I live near, that I work with, that are just folks. We don't have to try to be, on a platform about it. So yeah, so I mean, it's just kind of more and more rough. And so I think that's probably why I've kind of come into a more electoral, like spending some time doing electoral politics stuff. Like I'm doing a training tomorrow. I'm doing phone banking. This is my first year ever doing phone banking. And my God, it's boring. But, it's like connecting with folks that just need information about where to vote and trying to encourage them to vote for someone that's doing good stuff. And it's not sexy. Like, it's not like phone banking ain't sexy.
It could be frustrating, I imagine.
Yeah, it's mostly just people hanging up on you, and then like I'm doing a training tomorrow for doing my first ever like poll watching. So just hanging out at the polls, and just being available if people have questions. So it's just like, it's not sexy, but it's like,
it's kind of like
that's
dividing
the work.
your attention.
Yeah. And so it's like just like being, just trying to be present and just being like, how can I be helpful for just working class folks that just need like things to get better? And wouldn't it be great if eventually it got to revolution of some kind, hopefully peaceful, that we can change the way that the economy and our electoral and political system work? That'd be great. But to get to that point, we got to do a lot. It comes back full circle. For me, it's doing the dishes. It's like politically what the dishes are. Like everybody wants a revolution, but no one wants to do the dishes. But like that quote means more than just act. I mean, it also actually means just doing the dishes. They're piled up in the sink right now. But it also means like doing the unsexy work of community organizing and showing up, like sitting in Zoom meetings, which is all it is now. Sitting in training, like calling people, like that work sucks. Like it's honestly the last thing. I hate being on the phone. Like I hate doing that. Like I don't feel comfortable in that space. I don't like talking to folks and trying to convince them to vote for someone. Like that's not where I feel comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can just be like learning, just kind of be present and be available for folks, because ultimately like it has a big impact on their life, even if they don't think it does. Like it actually does. So like just trying to be okay, just being that person that's kind of uncomfortable and not living in a kind of pure, perfect space politically, but just being like okay with it. If that makes any sense at all.
No, I like referencing. And before I ask you my last question that I asked, I guess the majority of the people have been on board. Wanted to comment on that space that you mentioned, that idealistic sort of like it's like a glorified utopia space that lives in our brains to justify sometimes some of our positions or our inactions or our uninvolvement in some areas. And I do agree, man. Sometimes we have to draw a line, and sometimes we have to whatever line or wherever that line might be for some of us, to say no, I can't do that. And I'm not just saying this to justify my lack of action, but sometimes we do kind of have this sort of glorified, and this is just for anyone to just reflect on their own. This is not to pass judgment. I think we need to find we need to find ourselves outside of that place of judgment, just for the sake of kind of making ourselves feel a little bit better about our own selves, and then and
Oh
just
yeah.
be real, be honest. Even if that honesty is handled in silence, to
Yeah.
be honest about stuff and not try to find an argument to justify yourself, whether it be in that conversation you're having with another person, with your family, whomever, or online. Just fucking be honest that you don't
Hmm.
feel the need to come up with this comprehensive argument to
Oh yeah.
justify whatever. Just be honest. If an idea of a
Hmm.
person hits you and it hits you deeply and you feel even convicted and you feel like, fuck, man, like this is true, don't try to wrestle it. Don't try to
Hmm.
just, at best, maybe, or at the very least, just be silent or be honest and be like, oh, fuck, man, I agree. Like, that's true.
Yeah.
I had not thought about it, and I think it's just getting to that point of vulnerability to be like, because you don't need to pretend anything. You don't need to, you don't need to find yourself in this apologetic space that you need to come up with
Hmm.
ways to better best market yourself.
Mm.
Um, because
Yes.
who cares? Who cares? Like, so, but
Yeah. No, I mean,
it's a process.
yeah. Well, I think we've all been so trained to kind of portray again that like persona of
Mm-hmm.
I liked your word like we're always marketing ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and like my mind's always, I mean, I do like graphic design, which is pretty much just marketing and branding, so it's like I spend a lot of time just thinking about how we're communicating this organization or this company to a client. So it's like you but it's like that's what we're doing all the time on social media. And that's like we're trained to kind of just do that all the time, and like relearning how to just kind of be in process. Like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I think about this, but here I am. Again, that kind of, it's that doing versus being, just kind of being present with folks and just being like, I don't got the answer. I don't have a right idea about this, but I'm here and I'm trying to learn, and also like giving that grace to other folks. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's, especially, in the kind of religious culture I grew up in, there was a lot of this, but I see it a lot of this reflected in political organizing circles as well, where there's a sense of like, well, you're not where I am, so that means you're wrong. And I mean, it's very much in this whole kind of cancel culture, call out culture type stuff as well. And you just, there's a toxicity to that some of it's valid. Like you have to kind of draw a line and bring some accountability, especially to people in power, people that have big platforms. But on the other hand, you gotta be gracious, especially with folks that are just neighbors and your people in organizing situations. And so it's like learning to be graceful with yourself and be vulnerable, but then also allowing others to be vulnerable as well, and
Mm-hmm.
not to be this polished persona of an activist or whatever that you might think they need to be. Like, and it's okay to kind of just ask questions and be wrong. It's okay to be wrong. Like, I think we spend so
Yeah,
much of our
yeah.
time thinking we have to have the right answers and be right. It's like, no, it's okay to be wrong. And
There's so many things that we say, so many things that we do are constant projections, and to find yourself in that place of realization that, okay, that's this is what I do, this is why I'm doing this. Okay, even if it's just a thing, like even if you just dealing in your head, you're not saying it, but you're like, okay, I'm gonna,
Mhm.
I'm tempted to shift to this place, but if
Yeah,
I do, it's a projection. It has nothing to
yeah,
do with this person I'm talking to, where you are, or like, like for example, for me, like I was very grossly invested in even post Christianity for me, just in my own version of evangelism, and I
hmm,
needed to convince the
yeah,
other person, and I just had this lack
yeah,
of peace because and then when I find myself now not in that place and just really conversing and trying to get to a place of exchanging, not convincing, then you're
hmm,
completely fine with just when the conversation comes to an end or wherever it comes to an end. You're like,
yeah,
all right, good, and not
yeah,
feel like I need to have that last checkmate,
yeah.
or all
You don't have to
coming
be
from a
right.
place of insecurity. You don't have to be right. You don't have
We
to
don't have
right.
to win.
Yeah, and because it's an illusion. There is no winning.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I like to close things off with this sort of like imaginary or this imaginarium space of visualizing a time capsule and what kind of has to do with our legacy. That's too big of a word, but
Yeah.
fuck legacy. The envisioning in the future ahead, long future ahead, like centuries from now, even maybe thousands of years from now, like this time capsule will be found by another sort of species. And what would you leave in this time capsule as a communication to what life was, like, this whole human experience, this human project life experiment was, that you feel would be worthy of communicating to this new species that is to find this time capsule? And you have the last word. Thoughts, words, songs, objects, whatever. Abstract things that you can't put, but this is hypothetical, so who cares?
I mean, the first thing I come to is just that there's joy. There's joy to be found, and it's there even when it seems like the most unlikely time or place for it. I think that's one thing that I always come back to, is that there's always these little, if you're willing to have it, to see it, to find it, there's moments of joy kind of everywhere. That's my thing.
Beautiful. Hey man, dude, I really thank you for taking out this space and having this sort of a very impromptu and very unscripted and very untimed conversation. That does not go by unthanked and unappreciated. I really do value you taking this space and for being a friend, even in the intermittentness of how our friendship is, or how, but there's always a connection, and I do.
It's been good. It's been joyful, and it's been beautiful. And thanks for inviting me into this space, into these conversations you've been having, and you got to come back to Pittsburgh. We'd love to have you again.
There's a beautiful thing about Pittsburgh. You guys, obviously, Roberto Clemente.
Yes.
And of course, Fred Rogers. I mean, that's something I would love to explore more.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's many more, but at least those are the ones that I know about.
Hey, there's some good ones. Yeah. There's all sorts of good things to find, but yeah, we gotta find someone to connect you. Who you asked me? You gotta find Mrs. Rogers is who you want to connect with.
Joanne Rogers. Oh my God, I would love to talk to Joanne.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to connect with her, but it might be a little bit easier to connect with Mr. McFeely. I've known several people who connect. Oh yeah. He's a bit more of a public figure. So
well, if that can be something that somehow you can connect me to, and whomever, dude, very well appreciated. We can have them on Tertuliando for sure.
If you plan a trip, it'll put the fire under my butt to get searching.
Dale, you're on, man. You're on. I'm actually doing a paper on the pedagogy of Mr. Rogers. So,
all right.
So that would actually give. I mean, this whole thing obviously has to dissipate. But yeah, hey man, that could be something I could do as a bit of a maybe a last adventure before I go back to Europe, whenever that might be. But see, oye, amigo, I'm taking that on. I am, seriously.
Hey, much love for you, Angel.
Hey, cuídate. Saludos a Amber. A big hug from my part to her.
All right.
Mucha paz, gente. And I like to close off with this with people. I like to close off with this. Don't leave yet.
All right.
We have this very famous Puerto Rican psychic called Walter Mercado. He passed away, but he loved to close every one of his segments in much peace and love. Mucha paz y amor para todos. Y nos vemos en la próxima. Adiós, gente.
Adiós.